The theater's glowing marquee once praised Emily Carter, but now it blazes her downfall in cruel headlines. Crowds jeered as Emily walked, trembling, her phone buzzing endlessly with alerts of betrayal. Emily whispered, "How could they turn on me so fast?" Mark Turner, once a colleague, smirked in the shadows, feeding whispers to eager listeners. Sophie Lane, her closest friend, stayed by her side, her eyes pleading with Emily to keep walking. In the chaos, Daniel Price, her rival, shouted lies that traveled faster than truth, igniting fury in strangers. Emily gasped, "Daniel is twisting everything, Sophie. Why is no one stopping him?" Sophie replied, "Because envy burns louder than reason." Emily's tears blurred the neon lights into streaks of despair as faceless voices screamed her name with venom. Behind the noise, Claire Carter, Emily's sister, hid in silence, refusing to step into the storm. Emily thought, "My own blood won't even fight for me." From a distance, Oliver Hayes, a quiet journalist, scribbled notes, his eyes heavy with the weight of truth he dared not yet share. Emily clenched her fists, whispering, "They don't want justice, they want my destruction." Emily's name trended worldwide before dawn, hashtags dripping poison into every corner of the internet. She sat on Sophie's couch, staring blankly at the floor. Emily whispered, "I can't breathe, Sophie, it's everywhere." Sophie murmured, "They don't want truth. They want spectacle." Mark's fabricated story dominated headlines, each article gnawing away at Emily's dignity. Daniel's voice echoed in broadcasts, declaring Emily's career dead. Claire ignored the calls, her silence louder than any insult. Oliver typed drafts of an article he dared not yet publish, torn by fear of backlash. Emily whispered, "If even my sister won't speak, maybe I deserve this." Sophie grabbed her hand, her voice fierce. "No, Emily, you don't deserve destruction for shining too brightly." By morning, sponsors cut ties with chilling precision. Emily scrolled through emails ending contracts once praised for her brilliance. Emily muttered, "They erased me overnight." Sophie said, "They fear losing themselves if they stand by you." Mark celebrated behind closed doors, whispering to partners eager for Emily's spot. Daniel's smirk appeared on TV, his lies given polished airtime. Claire avoided reporters camped outside her home, drawing curtains tight. Oliver recorded an interview with a witness who doubted Daniel's claims, yet fear kept it buried. Emily whispered, "They're carving away my life, piece by piece." Sophie answered, "But they can't erase your truth." Paparazzi swarmed outside Emily's apartment, shouting questions like daggers. Emily peeked through curtains, trembling. Sophie whispered, "Don't look, Emily." Mark fed stories to tabloids, grinning in polished interviews. Daniel posed dramatically, painting Emily as a fraud. Claire's silence stretched into abandonment, her social media wiped clean of Emily's name. Oliver stared at his recorder, hesitating to release what he knew. Emily gasped, "They've turned my life into entertainment." Sophie answered, "And entertainment is what destroys the innocent fastest." The noise became unbearable. Emily fled into the night, hood pulled low, Sophie chasing after her. Emily whispered, "I need silence, Sophie. I need to disappear." Sophie pleaded, "Running won't erase their envy." Mark toasted with champagne, celebrating Emily's collapse. Daniel reveled in interviews, his lies shaping headlines. Claire stared at her reflection, lips trembling, phone in hand but never dialing Emily's number. Oliver sat awake at his desk, the truth burning in his notes. Emily stopped at an alley's end, breath ragged, whispering, "They don't want me alive in light." Sophie said, "Then we'll fight their shadows." Emily sat on her childhood bed, staring at faded posters of dancers who once inspired her. She whispered, "I used to dream here, Sophie, not fear." Sophie sat beside her, saying, "Dreams don't vanish because they hate you." Emily touched her reflection in the cracked mirror, her face pale and tired. Daniel's words haunted her, echoes of falsehoods that clung like smoke. Mark's smirk lingered in her memory, his betrayal louder than the mob's screams. Claire hadn't called in weeks, and silence became its own form of violence. Emily whispered, "Even my family leaves me." Sophie replied, because envy frightens them, Emily, not because you're broken. Oliver, from his quiet corner, reread his notes, his heart aching at the truth he hid. Emily sighed. I was once their star, now I'm their shame. Sophie said firmly, you're still you, and that matters more than their lies. Emily walked through an empty rehearsal studio, dust catching in the light. Her shoes tapped once, then stopped as memories swarmed. She whispered, this was where they cheered. Sophie leaned against the wall, watching quietly, whispering, they can't erase the floor you built yourself. Emily's hands trembled as she touched the bare, recalling every night she had pushed beyond exhaustion. Daniel's shadow loomed in her mind, his lies turning her strength into supposed arrogance. Mark's envy was now her prison. Claire's absence sliced deeper. No call, no defense. Emily whispered, why can't she stand for me? Sophie answered, fear is easier than courage. Oliver recorded his own voice quietly, saying, truth waits for timing, but guilt waits for no one. Emily pressed her forehead against the mirror, whispering, I'm still here, aren't I? Emily sat on a park bench, the city humming in the background, children playing in the distance. She whispered, they still laugh while I crumble. Sophie said, laughter proves life goes on, Emily. Daniel's face flashed across a giant billboard nearby, smug and triumphant. Mark's name appeared in news scrolls announcing new opportunities stolen from Emily. Claire scrolled silently at home, eyes watering but never typing a word. Oliver sipped bitter coffee, guilt gnawing as he watched Daniel's rise. Emily whispered, he takes my place, and they clap for him. Sophie leaned closer, saying, but applause fades faster than truth. Emily looked at her shaking hands, whispering, I'm afraid I'll never rise again. Sophie replied softly, you've already survived the fall, Emily. Emily stood outside her old high school auditorium, staring at faded banners that once bore her name. She whispered, they used to honor me here. Sophie touched her shoulder, saying, they still can't erase what you earned. Daniel's smirk played across her memory, rewriting her victories into theft. Mark toasted quietly in bars, bragging about Emily's collapse. Claire's silence echoed from an unanswered voicemail. Emily left trembling. Oliver held an envelope of evidence, but kept it locked away, fearing the fire it might start. Emily said, I was someone once. Sophie replied, you still are, Emily. She pressed her palm against the cold door, tears running unchecked. Emily opened an old scrapbook, pages filled with newspaper clippings, photos, and handwritten notes. Her smile flickered briefly before tears blurred the ink. She whispered, this was me, wasn't it? Sophie said, it still is. Emily saw her sister Claire smiling in old photos, then slammed the book shut. She muttered, but she won't even look at me now. Sophie whispered, her silence is her weakness, not yours. Daniel's interviews echoed from the television in the background, lies painted as fact. Mark was photographed shaking hands with industry leaders, feeding his new role. Oliver stared at his blank article draft, whispering, the truth burns holes if I don't release it. Emily clutched the scrapbook tightly, whispering, if my past is all I have, maybe it's enough. Sophie said, it's proof you mattered before their envy. And you still do. Emily sat in Sophie's car, rain streaking down the windows like 1,000 tears echoing her own. She whispered, they're stripping everything from me. Sophie said, they fear your light, not your truth. Emily opened her email, her last sponsorship gone, the subject line cold and final. Daniel appeared on morning shows, his voice polished, painting her as deceitful. Mark whispered to industry leaders, sealing her exclusion from stages she once owned. Claire stayed silent, ignoring messages that begged for a sister's voice. Oliver drank bitter coffee, staring at the damning lies replayed on television. Emily whispered, every door closes, Sophie. Sophie replied, that means you must find one they can't lock. Emily pressed her forehead to the glass, feeling the world outside jeer, while she drowned in betrayal. Emily tried walking into a cafe, but whispers spread before she ordered. She whispered, they see me as poison. Sophie said, you're still human. Strangers filmed her, laughter sharp as knives. Daniel's interview played on a mounted TV, his smirk bleeding lies into their minds. Mark raised a glass in another corner, celebrating with those who benefited from her fall. Claire scrolled through her phone miles away, ignoring Emily's latest plea. Oliver's fingers hovered over a keyboard, but fear glued them still. Emily whispered, "I'm their entertainment now." Sophie said, "Then we take back the story." Emily clenched her fists, her breath shallow, every step a battle against invisible chains. Emily scrolled through old photos on her phone, each smile now twisted by online captions mocking her. She whispered, "They turned my joy into weapons." Sophie said, "They can't touch the truth behind those moments." Daniel released another false interview, reshaping her history into betrayal. Mark celebrated his rising status, his face appearing on posters once meant for Emily. Claire's silence grew heavier, her refusal to answer felt like abandonment. Oliver closed his notebook, guilt written across his brow. Emily whispered, "I don't recognize myself anymore." Sophie replied, "You're still Emily, and that is enough to fight." Her voice was strong, but her eyes carried the same exhaustion. Emily tried to visit her old dance studio, but the locks were changed, and her name erased from the bulletin board. She whispered, "They erased me from my own home." Sophie said, "They can erase walls, not your spirit." Daniel stood inside with press, claiming her legacy. Mark greeted cameras, praising the fresh era her downfall created. Claire stayed hidden, unwilling to be linked to the storm. Oliver passed the studio with notebook in hand, hesitating, his lips pressed thin. Emily whispered, "Even the floor I bled on rejects me." Sophie said, "That floor remembers, even if they pretend it doesn't." Emily turned away, her shoulders heavy under the rain. Emily's face appeared on a tabloid cover, the headline screaming fraud. She whispered, "They want me buried." Sophie said, "They want a spectacle, not justice." Daniel's lies spread across television networks, his career thriving. Mark leaned into microphones, claiming to protect the art while secretly feeding her ruin. Claire ignored her family group chat where Emily's name was ripped apart. Oliver sat in silence, pressing record on his tape, whispering his guilt into the machine. Emily whispered, "I don't have strength left." Sophie grabbed her hand, saying, "Then I'll hold it until you do." Emily wept, her heart breaking as the world applauded her destruction. Emily sat in Sophie's apartment, her hands shaking as she scrolled through another article slandering her name. She whispered, "I can't fight lies when everyone believes them." Sophie said, "Then we find proof." Emily's phone buzzed, an anonymous message containing files too detailed to be coincidence. Sophie gasped, "Emily, these emails." Daniel and Mark plotted everything. Emily's breath caught, her world tilting as betrayal took sharper shape. Daniel's signature mocked her, attached to strategies for feeding the press. Mark's smug notes detailed how he'd replace her. Claire's silence loomed larger. Had she known all along? Oliver sat at his desk, opening his own folder of evidence, guilt pressing against his ribs. Emily whispered, "They built my ruin on paper." Sophie said, "Then we'll tear their lies apart with truth." Emily printed the leaked documents, spreading them across the table like puzzle pieces of betrayal. She whispered, "They mapped every step of my downfall." Sophie said, "This is the proof they never thought you'd see." Daniel's voice echoed on television in the background, declaring her guilt. Mark laughed with reporters, shaking hands as if the crown was already his. Emily stared at the black and white words that bled with her pain. Claire's silence was unbearable now, her absence cutting sharper than public jeers. Oliver whispered into his recorder, "If I stay silent, I am no better than them." Emily pressed her palm against the papers, whispering, "I thought envy was abstract, but here it is, signed and stamped." Sophie said, "Now we fight back." Emily held a photo in her hand, one taken during her last performance, now scribbled over with mocking headlines. She whispered, "They destroyed my art with envy." Sophie said, "But envy always reveals itself." Emily noticed a detail in the leaked files. Mark had coordinated stories with Daniel months before her collapse. Her chest ached with betrayal sharper than any mob. Claire's absence became unbearable, her silence almost complicit. Oliver reread his notes, every page proof of truths he had buried. Emily whispered, "It was never about justice, Sophie. It was their hunger for my stage." Sophie answered, "Then their hunger will choke them when truth surfaces." Emily's tears fell onto the photo, her reflection warped by wet ink. Emily called Claire again, her voice trembling as the voicemail beeped. She whispered, "Claire, I know you hear me. Please don't let silence mean betrayal." Sophie sat nearby, eyes heavy, whispering, "Her silence doesn't erase your fight." Daniel appeared on yet another interview, his lies gaining applause. Mark stepped into new roles Emily once held, his smile sharper with every headline. Oliver stared at the folder of evidence, his hands trembling with the weight of what he could unleash. Emily whispered, "If even family turns away, then I stand alone." Sophie answered, "No, Emily, you don't stand alone, not while I'm breathing." Emily sank into the couch, clutching the phone as though it could mend her heart. Emily spread the evidence on the floor, her breathing sharp as thunder echoed outside. She whispered, "They thought they buried me, but I hold their shovels now." Sophie's eyes blazed, saying, "We show the world who they really are." Daniel's voice played faintly on a news clip, but the lies now carried cracks. Mark's notes were damning, his ambition inked into every page. Claire's absence remained an open wound, her silence louder than storms. Oliver finally picked up the phone, his voice trembling as he said, "Emily, I know the truth." Emily froze, whispering, "You've known all along." Sophie looked at her with shock and hope. Emily whispered, "Then maybe I'm not alone after all." Emily stood before Sophie with the documents clutched in her hands, her body trembling as anger burst through her sorrow. She whispered, "This is no longer survival, Sophie. This is war." Sophie's voice was steady, "Then we fight with their own weapons." Daniel appeared live on television, grinning, unaware that his lies had been documented in his own hand. Mark prepared for another interview, already drunk on his stolen victories. Emily slammed her fist against the table, shouting, "They built my coffin but left me the nails to return them." Sophie replied, "And we will hammer truth into their walls." Claire's silence still rang heavy, but the evidence had begun to replace despair with fire. Oliver recorded his trembling voice again, whispering, "It's time I finally speak." Emily's breath steadied, her eyes sharp with defiance. Emily walked into the press conference Daniel and Mark had staged, her presence cutting through the room like a blade. Reporters gasped, cameras flashing wildly. Emily whispered to Sophie, "They won't silence me anymore." Daniel froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. Mark's face turned pale, the weight of exposure dawning. Sophie held Emily's arm tightly, whispering, "This is your stage, take it back." Emily pulled out the papers, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger. "These are their lies, their words, their plots to destroy me." Murmurs rose as reporters grabbed at copies, flashes intensifying. Daniel shouted, "She's lying," but the documents bore his signature. Mark stammered as evidence of his betrayal was displayed. Emily whispered to herself, "Let them choke on truth." The press roared with questions, voices colliding in chaos. Emily shouted above the noise, "They ruined me for envy, not justice." Daniel slammed the podium yelling, "She's desperate," but his trembling hands betrayed him. Mark attempted to smile, but sweat traced his temples. Sophie whispered, "Hold strong, Emily." Emily held another document to the crowd, each line burning away the falsehoods that had trapped her. Oliver entered the room at last, his voice carrying from the back. "I was there. I saw the truth." All heads turned as he raised his recorder. Emily's chest rose, her voice breaking but powerful. "They wanted my silence, but today I speak louder than their envy." The room thundered with flashes, the truth unstoppable. Daniel lunged toward the microphones shouting lies, but reporters shoved the evidence in his face. Mark tried to leave quietly, but flashes followed him like fire. Emily's voice trembled with rage, "You stole my life for ambition." Sophie gripped her arm, whispering, "Finish it." Emily's tears streaked her cheeks, but her words were iron. You used envy as your weapon, but truth cuts deeper. Daniel screamed, "She's nothing," but his voice cracked. Mark stumbled, his smile shattered under the glare of truth. Oliver's voice rang out again, "She's telling the truth. I saw everything." Reporters swarmed them, demanding answers. Emily whispered to herself, "This is the moment I take back my name." The crowd erupted with overlapping questions, the storm finally turning on Daniel and Mark. Emily stood tall, her body trembling but her voice steady. "I will not be erased by envy." Sophie whispered proudly, "You've already won, Emily." Daniel collapsed into his chair, rage and fear battling in his eyes. Mark stuttered excuses, but the reporters pressed harder, their interest shifting. Claire watched the scene from her television at home, her face pale, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Oliver lowered his recorder, relief mixing with exhaustion. Emily whispered to herself, "They tried to bury me in shadows, but I chose the light." The hall thundered, not with condemnation, but with the weight of shifting truth. Emily walked through the quiet streets after the storm of the press conference, the city strangely calmer, as though the noise had finally shifted away from her. She whispered, "For the first time in months, I hear silence." Sophie smiled softly, saying, "That silence is your victory." Daniel hid behind closed doors, his face off the headlines for the first time, whispers of his lies spreading faster than his smirk ever did. Mark was cornered by reporters, his name dragged into the mud of his own greed. Claire sat alone at her kitchen table, clutching her phone, staring at Emily's number without dialing. Oliver typed furiously, every truth poured into words he could no longer suppress. Emily stopped under a street lamp, her breath visible in the cool air, whispering, "The storm tried to break me, but I'm still standing." Sophie said, "And standing means you've already won." Emily sat in Sophie's living room, sipping tea, her hands steadier than they had been in months. She whispered, "I never thought I'd feel warmth again." Sophie replied, "You carried it all along." The documents lay stacked on the table, evidence now shared across the city. Daniel's empire was crumbling as sponsors withdrew, each one citing his deception. Mark's interviews stopped, his phone unanswered, his face avoided. Claire finally typed Emily's name in her phone, deleting and retyping messages she never sent. Oliver's article hit the news, the words raw with truth, shifting the narrative Emily had begged for. Emily whispered, "They tried to kill my voice, but it echoes louder now." Sophie said, "Your voice was always stronger than their envy." Emily walked into the dance studio again, its doors open this time, the locks replaced by owners who apologized quietly in the shadows. She whispered, "It feels like home again." Sophie smiled, because it always was. She stepped onto the wooden floor, her shoes tapping softly, the echoes no longer cruel, but cleansing. Daniel's name was whispered in shame now, his downfall recorded. Mark's face appeared in news stories as a cautionary tale of envy's cost. Claire wept in her silence, her absence now her punishment. Oliver stood in the corner, finally welcomed, his notes transformed into validation. Emily whispered, "They stole my stage, but I reclaimed it." Sophie said, "And now is yours forever." Her eyes glistened as Emily spun once, her body light in the truth's embrace. Emily sat with Sophie on a park bench, watching children laugh and run across the grass. She whispered, "I thought laughter would haunt me, but now it heals." Sophie replied, "Because you survived their cruelty." Daniel was nowhere to be found, his silence the new sound of his empire's fall. Mark remained absent, his ambition turned to dust. Claire sat alone in her apartment, tears falling into silence, her own shame a prison. Oliver published more truth, each article reshaping Emily's story into strength instead of scandal. Emily whispered, "They wanted me erased, but I'm still here." Sophie answered, "Not just here, stronger than ever." Emily leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun replace months of shadow. Emily stood before a small group of dancers in the studio, her voice steady as she said, "Don't let envy destroy your light." Sophie clapped softly, her pride evident. Daniel remained absent from the world, his lies no longer heard. Mark faced investigations, his false victories dismantled. Claire held a photo of Emily, whispering apologies to an empty room. Oliver watched from the back, his recorder silent now, his truth spoken at last. Emily whispered to herself, "They tried to bury me, but they only planted me." Sophie said, "And now you bloom." The dancers applauded, their eyes wide with admiration. Emily's tears glistened, not of sorrow but of renewal, her spirit unbroken, her dignity reclaimed. Emily walked onto the stage of a small theater, filled not with critics but with young dancers eager to learn. She whispered, "This is my stage now." Sophie clapped from the front row, her smile unshaken. Daniel's name had become a warning whispered in corners, not a headline. Mark's career lay in ruins, doors shut where once they opened with envy. Claire sat alone, staring at her reflection, whispering apologies only the mirror would hear. Oliver scribbled notes of triumph this time, documenting not tragedy but rebirth. Emily raised her chin and said, "They stole my crown, but not my fire." The dancers applauded, hope flickering in their eyes. Sophie whispered to herself, she rose from ashes, and nothing can drag her down again. Emily walked through the city streets at dawn, the skyline painted in hues of pink and gold. She whispered, "The world feels different when I choose how to see it." Sophie walked beside her saying, "Because now it's your truth, not theirs." Billboards once filled with her disgrace now showed new faces, yet the venom that once haunted her was gone. Daniel sat in darkness somewhere, a ghost of his own lies. Mark was left to silence, his ambition his punishment. Claire wept silently at her window, clutching Emily's childhood photo, unable to undo the damage of her silence. Oliver handed a newspaper to a passerby, Emily's truth finally in print. Emily whispered, "They tried to define me, but only I hold that power." Emily returned to her apartment, standing at the window where she once hid from the mob's eyes. She whispered, "This view once felt like prison bars." Sophie said, "Now it's your horizon." She looked out at the city, not as a victim but as a survivor. Daniel's downfall was written across the news, no longer celebrated but despised. Mark's desperate apologies fell into emptiness, unheard and unwanted. Claire sat with their mother's old locket in her hands, shame carving into her silence. Oliver's latest article painted Emily as a symbol of endurance. Emily whispered, "They burned my name, but I carved it back with fire." Sophie rested her hand on Emily's shoulder saying, "And now no one can erase you." Emily visited the cemetery where her father rested, kneeling at the headstone with trembling hands. She whispered, "They tried to bury me, but I kept breathing." Sophie stood behind, silent support in her gaze. Daniel's name faded from relevance, his arrogance swallowed by silence. Mark wandered in anonymity, forgotten by the world he tried to rule. Claire finally wrote a letter she would never send, her regret pouring onto paper too late. Oliver walked a few rows behind, giving Emily space, his recorder switched off in respect. Emily whispered, "I survived for you, for me, for every dream they tried to kill." Sophie said quietly, "And you rose higher than they ever imagined." Emily stood once more in the spotlight, but this time it was not for fame, not for applause, only for truth. She whispered, "They wanted me gone, but I am still here." Sophie's eyes glistened with pride, whispering, "And that is the final blow." Daniel vanished into obscurity, Mark's name erased by his own greed, Claire bound forever by silence, Oliver carrying the truth as her witness. Emily looked into the empty theater, her reflection mirrored in the shadows of seats. She whispered, "I am not their tragedy, I am my own resurrection." Her voice echoed like a vow, a single sentence sharper than all their envy. Silence followed, not hollow but full, the kind of silence that lingers like thunder after a storm.